and gentlemen, welcome back to another very special, as always, HyperConscious Mastermind. Today we have a very special guest who is a client and becoming a friend of mine. He has a podcast called Tomorrow's Leader. He has spoken all over the world in front of thousands of people. He was in the financial services industry for many years, and he has been a leader for many years as well, leading all sorts of different groups. But as you're going to hear from John, leading yourself is the most important thing. You are the most important person that you lead, and John is going to talk about that today. So John Laurito, welcome, my friend, and I will let you do your thing.
Awesome. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate the appearance and the opportunity to speak to everybody here. And I want to make this as interactive as we can. So as you have questions, certainly shout them out. I guess the way we'll do it is just click on, raise your hand. Is that right, guys? And then you have questions, just shout them out. That's fine. So I'm going to cover a lot of stuff. There's so much. I'm passionate about leadership. And, as I know, Kevin and Alan, and probably a lot of you know, leadership, even if you're a formal leader leading a company, leading an organization, leading a team, it all starts with leading yourself. If you can't lead yourself, ultimately, you're not going to be an effective leader. So I'm going to talk today about some of the things. I spent 20 years running companies as CEO of either failing companies, trying to turn them around, and successful, trying to make them better. And all of these are leadership principles that I learned how to adapt to myself. And now I work with people in all different industries and walk of life on how to lead themselves better. So I just want to start. We're going to do a little quiz here. I want to see if anybody knows who this is. Anybody recognize that face?
Nope.
Okay. So that's a guy named David Brailsford. I don't know if anybody knows that name. Does anybody know that name? Okay, that's okay. I didn't know who he was before I heard about him, but he's the British cycling coach back in 2003. And if you've ever heard about this, so the British cycling team in 2003 was absolutely really, really not good. So they had gone 95 years literally without any kind of medal, any kind of championship. And they were so bad that bike manufacturers would not allow them to wear would not let them wear their materials. Literally, they didn't want their name associated with them at all. So they ultimately brought in Dave Brailsford, and Dave decided he believed in something called the law of the aggregation of marginal gains, which basically means you take all these little things and add them up, and over time, it's going to amount to big differences in the results. So he just, got the team together and he said, okay, we know we haven't had success. Let's just throw out on the table all the little things that are going to make a difference. I don't care what it is, whatever kind of idea you have that will make at least a 1% difference in the performance and our performance, then let's consider it as an option. So they started doing all these things. I mean, literally, and things that made sense. They had better training. They started to try out different uniforms. They found out that the indoor suits actually were more aerodynamic than the outdoor ones. They tested different recovery gels. They actually started doing even crazy things like bringing their pillows with them because it led to a better night's sleep. They had surgeons train them even how to wash their hands because it led to less infections and less downtime because of being sick. They started rubbing alcohol on the tires for better grip. They even painted the inside of the vans white so that it picked up dust particles and all this kind of stuff. And all these little things, each and every one of them didn't really seem like it would make any kind of a difference. It's like, okay, why are we doing this? But what happened is over the course of time, it transformed their team. In fact, in 2008, they started on a massive winning streak. I'll read some of this to you. They set in the Beijing Olympics, they won 60% of the gold medals. In the 2012 London Olympics, they set 9 Olympic records and 7 world records. And then between 2012 and 17, they won 5 out of 6 Tour de France. So it was like this unbelievable major transformation. And it all came from just these tiny little adjustments that each singular one didn't seem like it was going to make that big of a difference, but it totally transformed the entire team and the whole sport, really, for that matter. So I bring this up only because this is exactly what leadership is really about. It's thinking about all the little tiny things. Most people are looking for the magic switch. Okay, how do I become a better leader? How do I turn my life around? How do I turn an organization around? It doesn't just come from one thing. It ultimately is the aggregation of all these small things. So I'm going to go through 6 things that I know, and I've had the pleasure of working with ultra successful people, individuals, athletes, company leaders, organizations, and ultimately there are 6 things that I've seen individuals do that help them lead a better life. Okay, so I'm gonna throw these out. I'm gonna tell some stories. I'm gonna ask some questions, and again, as you have them, feel free to ask them. So the first,
Amber wanted to know who the coach of that team was. She heard the story. She wanted to know the
sure,
name.
it's David Brailsford. So it's Brailsford. So David Brailsford.
Perfect.
Yeah, really, really cool story. So, and there's a book called Habits by James Clear. I think it's Habits. It's something Habits. Atomic Habits. You got it. And that story is in there. So if you want to get even in depth on it, really, really cool stuff. So let's talk about the first area, and that is decisions. So if you think about it, life is just about how do you make better decisions, right? If you can string together really good decisions and you can do it consecutively, that's where you see people like totally transform their life, right? And it sounds like, great, okay, that's obvious. And, I just need to make better decisions. But in reality, that's hard. We know we're going to make bad decisions, and that's okay. That's part of life. We know we're going to do that, and we got to learn from it. But I'm going to give you a couple of things that can help you make better decisions, because all you have to do, again, is get 1% better in decision making. That's it. And can you avoid some of the bad decisions and a couple of the doozies that you might make once a year or once a month, whatever, and that itself would transform your whole life. So I want you to think for a minute. Think about the worst decision you've ever made, or think about a bad decision that you've made, a pretty big one, let's say even in the last year, and just get that in your mind for a minute. Painful to think about sometimes. I know I think about some that I've made. I'm like, geez, I want to ignore them, but and forget about them. But what's the one thing that tends to cause us to make more bad decisions than anything else?
Lack of knowledge, lack of clarity.
Could be lack of clarity, lack of knowledge.
Unresourceful state.
Okay. Share a little more about that.
So I have an acronym, HALT, HALLT. If you're hungry, horny, angry, lonely, late, or tired, Alan, it's time to halt.
Okay.
Step back and try to hyper-consciously think of what decision you're about to make.
Awesome. So I look at that even in a broader sense. If we take a step back, a lot of those fall into one category and one word, and that is emotions, right? When we have emotions cloud our decision making, we tend to make bad decisions. And I'm not talking about just negative emotions. I'm not talking about just anger, frustrated. If we're depressed, if we're stressed, we know we're going to make bad decisions during that period of time. But has anybody made a bad decision when they've been at a positive high, like a euphoric state, overconfident? I've made bad decisions when I've been overconfident before. So one of the keys is to decision making. Can you strip away the emotions? Can you be aware of it? And that's where sometimes having a partner, a coach, a life partner, a mentor can really help, because they're going to take away that emotion sometimes that you can't strip away. Okay, so that's number one. With that in mind, I see people all the time make long-term decisions based on short-term stuff. And a lot of times that leads to really bad decisions. And I see it with careers all the time. I see people make career changes because they need some sort of a temporary increase of income. They're frustrated. Maybe they're having a bad day or bad relationship with their boss. They have one person in their life, which might be a boss or a coworker, that's pushing them to make a long-term decision. So they're trying to solve a short-term problem with a long-term decision. And it's sometimes disastrous. And you've got to look at everything that you're doing. I'll give you a good example. I was on vacation with my family. My son, a year ago, when we were on this vacation, ate this monstrous sub, like meatball sub. And he's been talking about it for a year. He's like, Dad, you got to try this. It's like unbelievable. He's like, it's an 18-inch meatball parm sub. And he was really proud because he had finished it. Now, I remember seeing him when he came after he had eaten it, and he was like a zombie for the rest of the night. It like took him out of, he was just stuffed. But he's like, Dad, this vacation, you got to have it. You got to have it. So I'm like, okay, all right. Okay. I prepped. I didn't eat that day. It's in the afternoon, and I go and I eat this. I go to see this. I go to buy this sub. I go there. It's not an 18-inch sub. We measured it. It's 24 inches. I don't know if you've ever seen I can't even do it on my screen here, but 24-inch sub. is enormous. And I'm like immediately intimidated by this thing. So I'm like, okay, well, I can't not do this. So I go about, I start eating the thing, and I get halfway in, I'm really full. And I've got my whole family there. They're all like watching. This is like this fun thing. Let's see, dad and I've got my niece and nephew there. Let's see our uncle, barf. And so I'm eating this thing. I get to that. I do the first half. I get halfway through the second half, and I just realize I am stuffed. And I'm like, you know what? I think I could do this. I think if I really pushed, I could do this. But if I did, it would absolutely ruin the rest of my day on vacation. I know I'd be out of commission. I'd be like, whatever. And I'm like, you know what, Nick, I'll give you the pleasure. I'm not going to finish it. You win this and that. And I'm like, so what it made me realize though, is sometimes we do things because we just want that short-term victory, but we don't think about the consequence. In that case, the short-term pride victory was not worth the consequence of the pain I was going to have for the rest of that day. It just wasn't worth it when I started to think about it. Now, there might be other things where, hey, you know what? That would be worth it. I do want to tackle this because there's long-term rewards, or there's consequences for not doing it that I don't want to bear, I don't want to pay. So we've always got to think about that what is the consequence of the decision we're making? Here's a good way to think about this. This is something, I know I'm going fast, so stop me when I get rolling, I go fast.
Amber has a question. Amber,
yes.
Hand in the participants chat.
What's up, Amber?
What do we got?
Uh-oh, we cannot hear you.
If you raised your hand in the chat, and if you have a question, because we can't hear your mic right now,
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yay. Okay. Sorry. No, he asked the question. I was just going to chip in because I think sometimes we make bad decisions when we have unclear values. So it's like, oh, okay, we don't really necessarily know, so we'll just do whatever, without really thinking about what really matters to me, So that's what I was going to say.
Mm-hmm. Amber, you are so spot on with that. And that was actually going to be another topic there, is the importance of making values-based decisions, because you're so absolute accurate. There's a lot of times people aren't aware of their values. One of the takeaways I would say, and to give you is, and I've got a values exercise, a really cool worksheet that helps you figure it out. If you want that afterwards, we can get my info out, and I'm happy to send that to you because it's a really cool exercise. And I go through it like once a year, because sometimes you either forget, or sometimes your values over time may change. But if you know what your core values are, it makes decision-making so much easier. Because if you do make decisions that don't line up with your values, let's say, family is one of your core values, family and relationships. If you took a job that was out of state and you were seeing your family less, and maybe that was because you took the job because of the money, but if it wasn't allowing you to see your family, eventually there's going to be this internal rub. It may be 6 months from now, maybe a year from now, maybe 2, but eventually there's going to be a breakdown. And the reason is because you're not living in alignment with your values. So that's such a great point, Amber. Absolutely. Here's a really cool little test also that you can use. I call this the 10-10-10 rule. Anytime I'm making a big decision, I use the 10-10-10 rule. And that is, how am I going to feel 10 minutes after I make this decision? How am I going to feel 10 months after I make this decision? And how am I going to feel 10 years after I make this decision? And that simple exercise, 10 minutes, 10 months, 10 years, can sometimes help you figure out, okay, you know what? No, this doesn't make sense. I've used this with other people, and they're like, yeah, you know what? Short term, that would feel good, but that doesn't get me any closer. In fact, it gets me further away from where I'm trying to get long term. Really simple way to kind of put your eyes on what might be a potential problem. The last thing I'll say on this is sometimes it makes sense to take the decision-making out of the equation to make a better decision. And here's where I'm talking about. And I did one of my podcast episodes recently on this. I don't know about you, but when I go to the food store, I'm really bad when I go to the food store because I overbuy all the time. And I do this when I do the shopping at the worst time, when I'm hungry. And I went there recently, and I just moved into my new place in North Carolina, and so I had an empty fridge. I had to stock it up, and I'm like, okay, let me go there. I went with my daughter and my niece, and I've never spent, and I'm not proud of this, I'm embarrassed by this. I've never spent so much at a supermarket in my life. I got to the cash register and I could not believe what this totaled up to. And I even asked the girl that was checking me out, I'm like, is this like a record? Like, have you ever seen a bill this high? She's like, no, actually I haven't. I'm like, really? I'm like, I was kidding actually, but I seriously, like, I set the store record. This is like horrible. Do I get my name up somewhere or is there a plaque? But the bottom line is I left the decision-making of what I was going to buy in the hands of my, hunger state, when I was there, versus writing a list out beforehand. Then I don't have a decision to make, right? So then I'm going to be doing things more in alignment with my goals. If I'm working out and if I pre-plan my workout, then when I wake up in the morning and I'm not feeling good and I'm like tired, then I don't have anything to think about. I've just got to follow my workout plan. If I'm creating it that day when I go to the gym, I'm probably going to be a little easier on myself, right? So sometimes the best decision that you can make is take the decision-making process out of it, okay? Take away the decision. So hopefully that makes sense. I'll move on to the next one. We can come back with any questions on this, but I know I tend to just talk. So just stop me if I'm going too fast. So here's another one. So the first one is decisions. The second one that I see really top people that really lead themselves really well is it comes down to perspective. And perspective is how you see yourself and also how you see your world around you. And there's a few different things that I would mention in this with really successful people. Sometimes, I don't know if you've ever been sitting there and you're thinking about, and sometimes this gets really frustrating. You think about where you are right now versus where your ideal self is, what your end goal is, your vision. And that's motivating sometimes. But I don't know about you, but I can get really frustrated. Kevin helps me on my podcast, does a phenomenal job with everything. I didn't know what I was doing at all. And I get frustrated. He and I were talking earlier today. I'm like, I get frustrated because I think about where I want to get this thing to, and where it is now is like, 1/1000% of where I want it to get to. And that can be frustrating. But successful people focus, that's the gap between where we are and where we want to be. Successful people focus on the progress. So Kevin's always good to point out to me, hey, look at where you started from. I mean, man, it's been 4 months. You're growing, you're building. And where I was last month is not where I am now. And I'm making progress every single day. So that's the perspective that successful people and successful leaders have. Okay, that's one piece of it. Here's another part of it is how do you measure yourself and your progress? Do you measure it based on your goals? Or are you kind of measuring yourself against other people? Anybody out there competitive? Yep, big time, right? Alan is. I am too. So sometimes, I went mountain biking this weekend, and it was like a 13-mile mountain bike ride. It was with my brother-in-law, and I borrowed a friend's bike, and I'll come back and tell a couple other stories about that. But I just want to get a really good workout. I wanted this to be a really great burn. I wanted to burn a lot of calories. I wanted to have some fun. That was my goal. My brother-in-law is a thrill seeker. Like, he's a guy that will just bomb down the hill and take all kinds of risks and do all kinds of crazy stuff. And at first I was following him, and I'm kind of adapting my style and really changing my goals because I was with him, and I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll try and do this kind of crazy stuff. And then I realized, you know what? I'm getting further away from what I'm trying to do. I'm not getting as good of a workout. I'm not enjoying it as much. And it just reminded me that we've got to stick to our own goals. Measure your progress against yourself. Sometimes we can get distracted measuring by other people. Here's another interesting concept. Our perspective sometimes changes when we take a step in a direction. If I'm sitting there on the shoreline and I'm trying to map my journey out, sometimes we don't even begin the journey because we don't know what step 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 looks like. We don't know exactly the whole course. I don't know. Some of you may be that type of person. You got to see the whole picture and the whole journey and know every step of the process before you even launch the boat. But what's really interesting is when you do put the boat in the water and you do start, moving or paddling or driving the boat, your whole vantage changes. You see things that you didn't see before because you were stuck on the shore. And on the shoreline, you can only see so much. When you get out there, you start to see the whole picture. And you start to see different things that you never would have seen. You see possibilities, you see avenues, you see places you want to go. It starts to connect the dots. You start to realize what you need to do. And that's part of what successful people realize. Listen, I don't need to have everything mapped out and chart it out before I start that journey. Hey guys, I'm going to take a quick break. I've got this sun beaming through my window here. You can probably see this. So if we want to tee up any questions, hold on. Let me just, because that's probably annoying you as much as
No worries, no worries. I was thinking that's probably blinding him.
Yeah, seriously.
Little by little.
You want to check with that message?
No, we're going to be fine.
No, we'll leave it.
We're going to be just fine.
So I have a question. We might as well tee some questions up. So I wanted to ask you this. I like misunderstandings. I think that you talk about good decisions, right? We can only make decisions to the level of our current awareness. I see people making fitness decisions based on false data constantly, and it hurts my heart. What is the biggest misunderstanding in leadership from your perspective?
I think people feel like they have to have, in order to lead other people or themselves, they have to have all the answers. They have to know everything. And because they don't, then they don't do anything. And ultimately, then they're not helping themselves and they're not helping other people. So if you just think about, again, I don't need to go from not winning a trophy or a medal for 95 years to then setting all kinds of records. All I need to do is get 1% better, and that's it. And if I'm 1% better in something than other people, then I'm in a position to influence them to get even better themselves. So that's all. And I'm looking for people that are even 1% better than me to influence me. And that's it. That's all you have to think about. Most people are under that misconception they need to have all the answers.
Oh, that's so powerful. I've been guilty of that in the past for sure.
Same.
Yeah. Everybody is. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions? Yep. Do we have another question? Or?
No, we're good.
Oh, okay.
Well,
Okay. Yep. So let's talk about the third item, and this is one that I think is really important too. I see very successful leaders and individuals that really accomplish a lot in life that are the third word is obstacles, and I'm going to talk about kind of their approach on this because it's really how they deal with them. It's not that they don't have them; it's how they deal with their obstacles and their problems. And I think a lot of times what it comes down to is we tend sometimes to overthink things, first of all. We tend to think that for our problems, there's a really complex answer that we have to find. And oftentimes the answer to our problems or the obstacle that's in front of us is like really pretty basic and easy. There was a truck that got stuck underneath an overpass, a big 18-wheeler, and all kinds of people were around it. It backed up traffic for miles. Nobody knew what to do. How do we get this truck out of here? I mean, it's literally jammed under the underpass. And it was like a little 9-year-old girl that came up with the answer. And she's like, well, why don't you just take the air out of the tires? And everybody's like, that's a great idea. Let's do that. Let's take the air out of the tires. So they took the air out of the tires, and sure enough, they rolled the truck right through. And adults were racking their brains, people with, life, certainly success in life, and they couldn't figure it out. It took a 9-year-old girl's perspective and a simple approach to fix the problem. When I started doing podcasting, I got this microphone that you see right here, which is a great microphone. I love it. And, I did a lot of research. I found a really good one. It's not a cheap microphone. It's a pretty pricey one. But I hated it when I first got it because it sounded horrible. And I kept working with the guy at the company that sold it to me. And I'm like, listen, you got to help me with this. I mean, what do I have the settings set up wrong or whatever? There's all these buttons in the back. I'm pressing them. I'm trying to figure out what do I set it on? Because it sounds horrible. It sounds tinny. And he's working with me. It must have been 4 or 5 phone calls, literally. And we're downloading programs. I mean, I'm setting all these dials up. And I finally had a call with him. I'm like, listen, man, I'm going to send it back. I'll take a cheapo one because my cheapo one sounds better than this, expensive one. And he's like, well, before we do, can I ask you a question? He said, I don't want to insult you or anything like that. I don't mean this, but you are talking into the side of the mic that has the red label on it, right? And I'm like, what red label? I don't see a red label. And then I go around the back. I'm like, oh, you mean the one in the back? He's like, well, that's the problem. You're speaking in the microphone in the wrong side. I'm like, are you kidding me? This whole time, this has been the problem with this mic. I'm speaking in the wrong side? All right. Well, simple solution to my complex problem. But sometimes we overthink things. We also have to know, is something truly an obstacle, or is it just a simple problem? Because I think sometimes we make something to be a bigger problem. So, sometimes other people put things in front of us that they think are an obstacle, and we adapt that as our own obstacle. I mean, literally, and it's really not, and it shouldn't be. We actually may have the resources to easily overcome it, but they can't. So it then is perceived that, okay, well, this is everybody's obstacle. Down here in North Carolina, there's a builder who, there's a town, I don't know if anybody's familiar with Cary, North Carolina, but there's a builder that pretty much, almost owns the city of Cary. It's a beautiful city. And he had wanted to put up a building, a 10-story building. And the city of Cary would not allow any building higher than 6 stories. They had a firm policy, requirement that all buildings had to be 6 stories or less. And so he couldn't do it. They went, nope, you can't build a 10-story building. Well, and for years, nobody built any building more than 6 stories. And he asked the question, he said, well, why can't I build a building 10 stories high? And the answer was, well, our fire trucks only go up 6 stories. And he said, okay, well, what if I bought you a fire truck that went up 10 stories? And he said, well, I guess, yeah, then you can build your 10-story building. So he bought them a fire truck that goes up 10 stories. Now, obviously, we're not in a position, all of us, to go buy a fire truck to solve our problems, but he was a, multi-millionaire with, maybe a billionaire with tons of real estate, had the resources, but it was assumed that nobody could do that. And that wasn't a solution that was ever presented. So sometimes we have to look at things creatively and don't just assume that the obstacle that other people are facing is going to be the obstacle that you're facing, or that you are not going to be able to overcome it very easily. I also think we tend to hold on to our problems or the things that hold us back way too long. Has anybody been in a situation where you felt like you had something? I don't care if it was a problem at work, it was something that was stressing you out. Maybe it was a relationship that you were in, something that was a problem or obstacle that was slowing you down or stopping you. And when you look back, you're like, you know what? I held on to that problem way too long.
Oh yeah.
Anybody guilty of that?
Many times.
Absolutely. I have too. What's interesting is our problems, they don't go away. You have to do something to relieve yourself of it, right? So if I ask you right now to fill up a glass of water and hold it out in front of you like this and just keep it suspended, that's not that big of a deal, right? We all can do that. But if I had you do that for this whole presentation, this whole talk, by the end, how would that feel?
Oh yeah.
You'd be like, your arm would be shaking. You'd be like, I can't.
Alan's soft.
So, but, that's the way our problems are, right? When we hold on to them, even a small thing becomes a big, big thing. When I was mountain biking this weekend, when I started this mountain bike, again, it was somebody else's bike. The seat was super uncomfortable. It was like, tilted the wrong way. And I'm like, okay. So I told my buddy, I'm like, it's all right. It's killing me, but I'll just keep going. And I'll just, tough it out. I will tell you, I never would have made the full bike ride had I not stopped, because my friend was like, listen, you're going to be miserable. Just stop. Let's adjust it. He had a tool to adjust it, and it made all the difference in the world. I know that even though it was an annoyance at first, it would have been such a big deal. I wouldn't have been able to enjoy the bike ride. I probably wouldn't have been able to finish it. So if you don't fix those problems early on, They only get worse, and they prevent you, and they become truly big obstacles. Okay, that's my big takeaway. And I share this with you just from my own mistakes in life and business. I can't tell you, in running businesses, I can't tell you how many times where I had a problem, maybe it was a problem employee, and I knew it. And I let that person be a problem for way too long. And I never looked back and said, I should have given them more time. Never. It was always, wow, I should have reacted faster. I knew it. I knew it was a problem. It wasn't going to change. It wasn't going to go away. Yet I made a decision not to do anything about it early enough. And it became worse.